All right guys, welcome back. I got this pile of junk on this table, and today we're going to talk about timber framing and the tools you need to timber frame. If you're thinking of building a small shed, maybe a work table, we're in the process now of building a woodworker bench that's going to be timber framed. Or if you want to build a barn like the one I'm in now and you want to do timber framing, then these are some of the tools you might need. You don't have to have them, you can do them by hand, but these will help you speed up the process. Even though it's still a pretty slow process, these will help speed them up. So today we're going to talk about these tools. Now, timber frame construction goes way back into the 1800s, or maybe even further back than that, probably for sure, but a lot of the old homes around America were built with timber framing, and it's a pretty good way to build because you can use green lumber and you can and not worry about having to dry it out. So that's one thing good for me, because we have a sawmill and I can go ahead and build with it and not have to wait to dry those beams out. So let's get into it and let's talk about these tools that we use for timber framing. Now, one of the first tools that I would say is a must, and I'll tell you which ones are a must and which ones are not a must. I think for me a must is a chisel. Now we have a Robert Sorby chisel. These have worked very well for me. They're really sharp. You can order these covers for them to keep the blade tip sharp, and they make different sizes. This is a 1-inch chisel, and we'll use it if we're trying to clean up stuff on the sides, or if you're making furniture, you may want to use a 1-inch. That would be helpful in that. We also have a 1.5-inch chisel, and this is going to be pretty much your standard for your bracing that goes on your timber frame. Now, a brace would look like, what I'm calling a brace would look like this, and that's what's going to be your angle piece on your timber frame. So you're going to use 1.5 inches for your mortise on most of your timber frame if you're building a barn or something like that. So you kind of got to have 1.5 inches. Now we also got a 2-inch, which is also necessary if you're building a barn. You're going to want to get a 2-inch because that's where your pockets for your main beams are going to be. They're going to be 2 inches. When your mortises for your beams or for your columns are going to be 2 inches. So we use a 2-inch for that. So these are all just in the wood knives or the chisels. And we also have, and this is an old one, I actually got a new one, I'll show you it, but this is a 2.5-inch slick, and this helps you once you've already cleaned everything off and you want to get it smooth. It's got kind of a baseball handle on the it's not you don't swing it, but you can use that to push with when you're pushing through to cut that wood. I mean, to get that little bit left off. It's good to have a slick for that. So that's not a must, but you know, we like it. Now this one's kind of old. Now we bought one the other day that is it said it was a boat slick, but I was going to get another one like the one I got, but it's actually a 3 3/8 inch, and this thing is huge. It's actually for boat making, but that one works pretty good. And we'll just show you right here. It'll peel it off. So that works good. So get you a slick if you want one. You don't necessarily have to have this one. So that's not a must-have, but that's kind of a want. And you don't need the one that's this big. But these are all the knives are Robert Sorby. If you want to look at that, I'm gonna leave the links for everything below. All right, the next thing that I would say is a must is going to be a good square. Obviously, any woodworker is going to need a square, but a good square is going to be a must because you're going to be cutting a lot of angles, and you need a good square. So this would be a carpenter square. I like that. You need that. You got to have that, and then this will be a framer square. So you need both of these whenever you're timber framing. Now, one thing, some tips you need to know when you're timber frame is this is a framer square. So this big section here is 2 inches. Now they do make some that are smaller, but for the standard, this is going to be 2 inches. Okay, and this is going to be 1.5 inches. That's the standard framer square, and really this is a timber framer square if you go back to the old days. So you got 2 inches, which is going to be the mortise on your timber frame. Your beams are all going to be 2 inches, and then your braces are going to be 1.5 inches. So this is already laid out for you. So when you're drawing out your timber frame, it's already the right size. You don't have to measure, you don't have to do all the measuring, you can use this. I'm gonna get some of this stuff out of the way so I'll know what I've talked about. All right, the next thing I would say we would need is a mallet. You're gonna need a mallet, and I'm not real sure where I got this from, but I'll try to find one good one and put a link down below. But this mallet is, it's not going to be a hard mallet like a metal. And so I guess it's made out of some kind of hard rubber, so it won't damage your wood knife, but you gotta have this with your wood knife. Now I want to keep in mind, a lot of this stuff can be done manually. You don't have to have all these power tools. You can do it manually. It's gonna take a lot longer. I've built 2 timber frame barns and I accumulated more tools along the way because of the amount of time it takes. You know, the first one I used a Harbor Freight drill like this one and used this bit to drill my mortises out, and it took forever. So, I mean, I'm talking about like it adds an extra year to your barn project. So, you still may use this for other purposes, but I really didn't use a drill, but you may want to if you want to do a little bit more manual. I got a tool here that we're going to talk about last that speeds it up a lot, but it's a pretty significant cost. So you may want to use this instead of this mortiser that we'll talk about at the end. Okay, the next thing you're going to need when you're cutting your tenons, you're going to need something to cut the tenon with. So you're going to need some kind of circular saw. Now I just got this DeWalt saw. You can get it, I recommend, and I'll put in the link what I recommend a worm drive saw, because it's going to be a lot more powerful than this battery powered DeWalt. I mean, I'm having to constantly charge batteries, so I do not recommend getting a battery powered circular saw for this. But we have another circular saw that is a skill saw, and it's the reason I recommend a worm drive, because this one right here is powerful. Now this thing's a big one. It's got, I think it's an 8-inch blade on it, but you can cut braces. You can cut through braces with this, and you can cut, I think, 4.5 inches. You can cut through 4.5 inch wood in one cut. So if you got an 8-inch beam, you can cut through it, and it won't, like if you're cutting a tenon on a column, then you can't do it with that little one. That can only be done with the braces. So you got to have something like this for that. But for the little one, I would recommend a worm drive skill saw for the little, when you're cutting little things, because that works better than that battery power one. So this one, not a need, but if you want to move faster, you really need to get one of these skill saws that has this big blade. I think it's a 8.5 inch blade, but I'll put a link again in the description below. All right, let's see. So the next thing I would say, you know, you can use a chainsaw if you got a chainsaw, but you're gonna have to have a way to cut through these big, large beams. And I have this skill saw, they call it a saw squatch or something like that, but it'll cut through a 16-inch timber with no problem. It's got like a chainsaw, you can see here. And so maybe one day we'll go through each of these tools in detail, because this thing right here is a beast. And it's also worm drive, and it's made by Skill Saw. I really like the Skill Saw circular saws better than any other. I've never used Milwaukee, but this Skill Saw really does a good job. So I would say for cutting your timbers, when you gotta cut them to the right length, this thing is not a must. Of course, you can do it with a chainsaw. I think I did a lot of mine on the first one with a chainsaw, and then eventually got one of these. This is a lot more accurate. But this is a good tool to have. Of course, you're gonna need a good tape measure, obviously. Nothing special about the tape measure, just gotta have a good one. For me, I gotta buy a bunch of them because I'm always misplacing them and losing them, so make sure you get a few of them when you go. You need a good thing to write with. I just use a marker. I know pencils are good, but this timber framing, it takes a while. So the reason I use a marker is, like, if you're doing this outside and you got your timbers outside, and you write on it with a pencil, and you can't come back for a week or two, it may be faded off by the time you get back. But if you write on it with a marker, it's a lot better when you come back. So I would use, they sell them at Lowe's, just get you a box of magic markers and you'll be able to write on that, and it'll stay a lot longer, because like I said, when you're and you'll see if you ever, when you start timber framing, but when you're drawing out or mapping out or laying out where you want the cuts to be, like I've done here, and I'll show you, if you're doing a timber frame, you may have to do this. Like when you look at the beam here, I had to put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 joints in this beam that I got up here. Now, I can't cut those 10 joints. You know, if you have another job, you can't get home from work and cut them. You can cut one joint and then maybe the next day cut another one. It takes some time to cut these joints. So if you write on it with a marker, then you can lay it all out and not have to worry about it being gone whenever you get ready to do your joints. So that's the reason I use a marker for that. You need a good saw for drilling your holes for your pegs. Now, when you do a hole for your timbers where when your post is going into your beam, you're gonna need a 1-inch peg. If you got a 2-inch tenon, then you need a 1-inch peg, is what I've been told. So you'll need a drill bit to drill out your peg holes. So you're gonna need a different size for your bracing. So you have to figure. So you need this. Of course, you can get a manual drill, but this speeds it up. And this is a whole hog by Milwaukee, and I'll put that in the link below. But to me, that's a must. I just think it would take forever to do your mortises if you don't at least have some kind of good drill. If you're doing that by hand, I mean, if that's what you want to do, that's fine, but it's going to take some time. So this is a must-have to me, but you can do it. They make tools where you can do it completely by hand. All right, you may also want to get just a handsaw, because sometimes you get to the end of something and you need to finish it up, or if you're doing everything by hand, you're going to have a saw, and then that's how you would cut your tenon. You would mark it and you'd cut it. You're going to cut it here, and then finish it out with your knife. So again, that's going to take a long time, but if you're doing it by hand, you need this. But even if you're not doing it by hand, I would recommend getting this just for cleanup. The next thing is these jigs that I made. Now, whenever you're drilling a hole, if you're drilling a hole into a timber, it's not always easy to keep your drill bit straight. So I use this, and I'll give you an example. I use these 1-inch, I think these are 1-inch, yeah. No, they're 3/4 inch, and this is 3/4 inch. So this is the bit for the brace. So you take your drill and you go in there, and that's going to keep it straight for you. So I made these jigs. This is just a pipe from Lowe's on a piece of wood. You may want to make some jigs to make it faster for things. And then lastly is just Makita Mortiser. Now this thing is pretty heavy, and it's got, again, you can see this chainsaw here. It's a chainsaw, but it makes the mortise, and it makes it 100 times faster than if you're trying to do it by hand or even with a drill. So this thing, not a must-have, but it's a want. I guess it's the Cadillac of timber framing. That's pretty expensive. I think it'll run you about $2,000, but I'll leave the link in case you want it. You probably don't, but it works really good. As you can see in the footage that we're showing, we're building a timber frame woodworker bench, and you can see this thing really eats through the mortises pretty quickly. It'll rotate so that you can cut in more than one spot. You can cut more than one hole. So this thing only cuts, I think it's like 1 inch by 4 inches. So then you got to move it to get it to cut the whole joint. But it's a beast, and it significantly speeds up the process of timber framing. Now, another tools I didn't show that you're going to need a chainsaw, obviously, to clean up stuff, and you're going to want to use a chainsaw to get your timbers down to a manageable size. And we'll talk about some of the techniques in some future videos, but this has just kind of been a summary of the tools you need. If you can think of any more that you might need that I've left out, put them in the comments below. And if you want to see a video on timber framing, click right here.